Thank you. Great. Well, thanks. Hi, everyone. I thought I'd start by just reflecting a little bit on a meeting we had yesterday. Scott and Dan and Eric were all a part of it, and share that for your benefit, Warren and Mark and others that joined. Share a little reflections on kind of what we did yesterday as subgroup facilitators to kind of check in on progress among the other groups. And then from there, open up for discussion around the third of our three framing questions, which I will throw in the chat here. Are there? Sorry, one sec. Which has to do with sort of policy and systems opportunities. And then if there's time, we'll get to a couple other questions that were more cross-cutting related to innovation and risk. But yesterday, our co-chairs, President Dagler and gosh, Dan, help me, Mary from Jack.
Yeah, Mary Dickinson, yep.
They facilitated a conversation with the various subgroup facilitators, and our group is about where all the other groups are, is kind of one of my key takeaways. All of the other groups have met twice, at least, it sounded like, had similar kind of brainstorming discussions. One group that was specifically focused on policy and risk and had, it seemed like, a pretty heavy contingent of attorneys, got very specific with some of their crosswalking and mapping of risk and opportunity to existing federal and state statutes. And that was really interesting to kind of see where they had been coming at the question. I think pretty much all of us are in the position of needing one or two more meetings. Hi, Representative Sarah, welcome. Thanks for joining. To kind of complete the work of our subgroup charge, and our deliverable would be, maybe a 2-page document or a series of some sort of narrative that our colleagues with GoPIF, excuse me, Dan and Scott can work with to try and synthesize some of the key takeaways as we then take a little bit of time off in August and come. Excuse me, everyone. Sorry about that. I'm coming off a cold, so that may happen a few times. Forgive me. As we come back together in September, the idea as a broader group is to start to work towards, forming our own broader group recommendations. Dan and Scott are going to surface some examples that we might work with, including a report that their office recently produced to guide the state on its response to some of the more natural disasters that we encountered last year. That was something that I think will be helpful as we begin to think about how to take our brainstorming discussions, merge them with the work of the other subgroups, and then come at some sort of broader, set of recommendations that align with the original executive order. So it's a good, healthy 90-minute discussion. Dan and Scott and Eric, who was also on the call, I'd invite you to add any of your observations as well before we move to our discussion.
Thank you. Hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then Representative Sarah, I'll share for your benefit, and congratulations and thanks for all the good work on the session. You guys landed the plane, and I'm sure you're breathing a little easier these days. So it's nice. It's nice to have you with us.
Well, thank you. I'm celebrating by renovating my house. So if there's banging in the background, that is why I'm currently parked in a half-finished dining room because my home office is stripped. Anyway, but yes, thank you. It's good to be here and focused on this one.
Great. Well, I shared with this group yesterday kind of the summary that I'll share with all of you now, which might be a nice recap to our discussions of the past couple meetings. Let me just share my screen real quickly here. Oh, and it looks like Commissioner Fortman's with us as well. I'm seeing in the chat. Hi, Commissioner. You're hearing us, but we're not seeing you, but that's okay. So welcome if you can hear us. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, great. So these are just notes that Lauren's helped us to prepare that reflect on our discussions of the prior 2 meetings where we tackled one and 2 of the 3 framing questions we've been given. One being, how can Maine's job training programs help Maine people be highly qualified for roles created or changed by AI? You'll recall that we had a really healthy discussion that included talk of the existing infrastructure, a way to potentially integrate or evolve standards and requirements of authorized training programs. We talked a lot about leveraging innovation that's happening in the private market or in other ways to modernize isn't the right word, to personalize and use AI as part of the ongoing sort of supports that the state provides. We talked, for example, about how we might leverage the existing 11 career centers throughout the state as showcases or showrooms or experimental sites that might be places of public-private experimentation and partnership. And I think that might be something we want to, talk again about as we reconvene with recommendations. Excuse me. And we talked a lot about how to engage and strengthen the communication around all of these things. In the meeting prior to that, we focused on how to be inclusive and make sure that workers specifically are included in efforts to monitor and respond to the impact of AI in the workplace. And through that discussion, you'll recall that we talked about leveraging the local workforce boards. We talked about the need to be inclusive and not think about underrepresented populations as an afterthought, but rather in the foreground of our recommendations and our work. I think there was at least an assertion, if not a pretty widespread belief that underrepresented groups or under engaged groups or under empowered groups are always sort of the afterthought on key initiatives like this. How might we sort of lead with them in mind was a theme of that first conversation. We talked about, again, demonstration pilots, and that was also, I think, colleagues who were on the call yesterday, support me in this. So that was a pretty dominant kind of cross-cutting theme. I think the idea of experiment, and setting up a variety of demonstration sites is something that each of the subgroups are likely to kind of come back with some ideas along those lines. There's some discussion in our first meeting around rules and policies and a way to solicit citizen input in an ongoing and almost organic way. And we talked about charging GoPIF if they're not already charged with maybe a more formal and specific role to be not just good at reporting what's occurred, but what might be likely to occur, kind of skating where the puck is going, if you will, on this topic. And again, a theme around communication. So this is just by way of sort of summarizing what we've covered as a group these last 2 meetings. Our third framing question I put in the chat: are there areas where Maine's workforce systems or policy may need to evolve to respond to AI-driven job opportunities or disruptions? We'll come to that in just a moment. And then if we can get to one of these today, I think it might be helpful to us in the interest of time. But I was reminded yesterday, and I confess I had missed this part of our original charge, so this is my mistake. The co-chairs also asked each of the subgroups to wrestle with these 2 questions. How can Maine mobilize AI innovation where it's needed most? And risks in this area, what are the most relevant potential harms from AI? So I think as we get to a final sort of written submission, we'll want to have something to say about each of these 2 questions. I think with all 3 of these, to some degree, we've talked about them in our prior 2 discussions, but I think with that, I'll open it up for just discussion about the question, for today's agenda. Are there areas where the workforce systems or policy need to evolve to AI-driven job opportunities or disruptions? And I'll stop sharing my screen. And as a reminder, my colleague Lauren Lulofs is with us, and she'll again take notes for us, which I think will be helpful as we get to the writing stage. Let's see, did I turn that off? Sorry, everyone, did the screen stop sharing? Yeah, perfect. Okay, any thoughts on any of that, or specifically on the question around workforce systems and policies and what might be needed to evolve there?
Is it possible, perhaps, Chris, to get a little bit of an overview of what the policies, what policies speak to this issue today, kind of how the workforce support infrastructure works in Maine?
Interesting. Any of our colleagues from the state help us with that?
Did we lose Commissioner Fortman here? I think we did. I will Mark or Eric, if either of you want to take a run at this, you're welcome to, or I can take my best swing at a bastardized approach if helpful.
I'll do my best. I kind of think about the workforce system and the policies. There are a number of programs that are offered, by the Department of Labor or others that are really focused on supporting workers in different types of categories. And often those are kind of are programs that are established by the federal government, and so we have certain kind of guidelines that we do have to meet to make sure that we can use grant funding in certain ways to support certain categories of workers. So I think we at the Department of Labor, we do the best that we can to support workers and try to figure out which program would be best suited to support certain types of workers to provide information to support a job search, to support somebody that might be interested in pursuing training to maybe change their careers or switch industries, etc. And we often use those programs to help support and fund workers who might be pursuing additional education and training. But I would say the training is often provided by partners. For example, the University of Maine system, Maine Community College system, or training that might be provided by private educational institutions, etc. So in terms of this question, to me, often we are kind of trying to take the federal guidance or the federal requirements. We are trying to support the customers to the best extent that we can possible, fully leverage resources, try to educate folks about what training opportunities are available to them. But to me, I think that the innovative space really comes from engagement with all the stakeholders within the workforce system. So we're somewhat responsive and then trying to provide folks with access to training, given the partnerships that we have. We don't necessarily know where the gaps are in terms of the training needs, as well as employers or the private sector do. So I think to me that's an area of possible innovation, is getting as much engagement as possible from businesses to identify what skills are needed in this world of technology moving so quickly. Identify the gaps in terms of candidates that they're seeing or skills that are really important within their organization, and then to partner within the workforce system or with a training institution like the community college system or the University of Maine system to try to better align or identify what the specific gaps are in terms of emerging skills needed today. So I don't know. I hope I did an okay job there.
What's interesting about that, Mark, I'm remembering the presentation you shared with the broader group, which did a really nice job of articulating job types and competencies and trends in that regard. But I think the spirit here is that all of that could be evolving so rapidly in the future. So I think that's a really important note, partnership and data and awareness and integration of a really fast evolving labor market at the level of competencies and skills. And I know that there are groups whose job it is to try to do just that. One that was quite popular a few years ago, and I think they were acquired or moved on to something else, was a group called Burning Glass, and others do the same. They sort of, their bread and butter is being able to make that data available. Representative Sarah?
Yeah, I wanted to raise kind of the flip side of the coin of Warren's question, which is, I mean, on the one hand, we're looking at what exists as an infrastructure to enable the workforce. The other side is, what do we want to see the workforce enabled to do? And I'm suggesting we look at the different layers or levels of skill enablement that Maine's economy is going to need, from people who are extremely AI savvy, down to what a baseline set of AI skills might need to look like for the various levels and sectors of Maine's workforce.
So you're talking broadly about sort of industry and new jobs, or jobs of the future there a bit?
Yeah, it's yeah. I hate to repeat the cliche of, people aren't going to lose their jobs to AI. They're going to lose them to people who are skilled at AI.
Right.
So it's like, what are those jobs for people who have AI skills look like? Because they're going to range from, the fairly basic to I'm also on the economy working group of this, and we've got somebody who's an AI entrepreneur, who's got a startup that is an AI business, and we need some of those, but we're going to need a lot more people who can apply AI to existing career fields and to new career fields that are created.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that keeps coming to mind for me in all of these discussions, and I'm probably over fixated on it, so feel free to rule it out. But the parallels to this moment for me, and sort of like the dawn of the commercial internet, are really strong. And I remember, and I'm sure most of you do too, asking questions about risks and ethical dilemmas, and how and in what ways would this new thing called the internet and e-commerce, get away from us and sort of run amok, or outpace our ability to handle it. And I'm sure it did all of those things from time to time, but it also seems too, in the analysis, that for the most part, some of the existing rules and policies and regulations, because they're sort of grounded in what's right for society, can kind of hold the firewall long enough, right? And so when the risk conversation for me gets too extreme, like the world's going to end and everybody's going to lose their job and we'll lose control over it, I always come back to that. We've sort of been there before, and I'm sure there was something before that example where it was similar. I'm just wondering if we ought to, with respect to this question, if we ought to think about how we ought to be mindful that there's certainly something new and different about AI that should be reckoned with, but also maybe ground our recommendation in not reinventing too many wheels. If the existing rules and regulations and policies, worked 2 years ago, maybe our default position might be that they can also work in an AI-driven world, so long as they could be made to work faster and be more responsive, something along those lines. Because I worry a little bit as just a citizen about, just over complicating what's already a complicated sort of public-private intersection.
Chris, this is Eric. I was thinking something along the same lines, and I think the way Mark framed it up is exactly right, and the way you're thinking is the way I'm thinking of it. And it's not so much about the policies, but really more about the mission or the aspirations, to be adaptive, to be nimble, and be responsive to what we're discovering, to optimize the opportunities, and not overcomplicate it with policies themselves.
Yeah, I popped my hand back up because my comment had been intended to be opportunity oriented, not risk oriented, and to be thinking about creating having a workforce enablement strategy that's informed by employers' needs in the state and what employers project to be needs going forward, and to somehow fold that process of assessing what employers are telling us or could be telling us into that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is what do we have in a workforce training, workforce enablement infrastructure currently, and how do we marry? It's just simply marrying supply and demand.
Yeah, we talked a lot last time about all the various ways that the existing centers and coaches and mentors that are supporting the people of Maine are gathering all these data and are really well positioned to be detecting trends and observations. And then if you marry that with training and educating them, you really could create an environment where I don't have the words, but the spirit of what a recommendation might be is that we become the best at real-time understanding and sentiment monitoring, although that word monitoring is probably not the right word to use, but understanding what's happening so that when we're advising someone who's seeking guidance, or when we're recruiting companies or thinking about a budget and a legislative session, we're never want for a real confident point of view about, how is this affecting the people of Maine, and where is it going to be a year from now in our best guess. So something around the existing systems, not modernizing them, but charging those who administer them to enable kind of a constant and real-time data gathering mechanism. And then I think we talked about last time being able to do something with all that data, because we probably also have a lot of inputs already. The question is, how do we synthesize it and make it intelligent, which could be its own AI initiative in the state. And another action item for our colleagues at GoPIF, build the system and implement it, the synthesis and the AI that kind of keep track of it all. Is there anything, Warren, in the startup ecosystem or what you're seeing that could be a catalyst in this regard? Does Maine want to be known for the systems AI innovations?
Well, if you're referring to kind of being on top of what's happening in the workforce, is that what you're referring to, Chris?
I think I was thinking more, yes, but more so like where you're looking at what companies you might invest in or scaffold or support or have invested in. Are you seeing is there a lot of investment flowing at system solutions along these lines? Is there a way to partner to accelerate?
Yeah, you mentioned there's two companies that come to mind. One I mentioned last time, which was Future Fit, but who do a bunch of the analysis that sort of says, if a job category is getting obsolete, what's that job category good at? So if bank tellers are going away, bank tellers tend to be really good, at certain kinds of vet jobs. And anyway, but you mentioned Burning Glass earlier, and Burning Glass was merged with MZ. They're owned by KKR. They were merged with MZ, and they're now called Lightcast. But there's actually 3 or 4 companies like that. One's called Talent Neuron, one's called Revelio, and there might be a couple of others, and they try to help figure out like sort of what are our career pathways, which so if for people who have certain kinds of skills, what's the next natural thing for them to do, which job categories are growing and shrinking. So a lot of that stuff is packaged and is actually designed to, I think one of the sales categories for them is states trying to figure this stuff out, and workforce boards and things like that. So to the extent that that data is not already being ingested, I don't know, Mark, if you've ever worked with that stuff, but that's certainly something that could potentially be useful.
Yeah, we certainly have. We're familiar with that. We don't have a subscription to the Lightcast product here, but there is definitely the potential either through products that are already available on the market, or with all of the data that is collected and produced within the Department of Labor. If we were able to build a product that we could deliver to our customers, I think that there is a lot of potential power to being able to do something like that. I think in terms of where we are now in the current landscape of AI in the state of Maine, we have access to some of the basic products, like the free version of ChatGPT, for example, where there would be a really strict delineation between being able to interact any information that might be, sensitive about employers or job seekers or anything like that. That level of information we'd never be able to interact that with, some of the free products that are available to us. But if we were able to build something within our own data systems that could really leverage all of the, all of the information to help inform, career choices of people, there could be a lot of potential and a lot of power in that, for sure.
Eric, not to put you on the spot, but maybe to put you on the spot for a second. I'm really curious. We got to hear a little bit about some of the work happening in Indiana, about how they're trying to do just this and knit together labor force information and reaching out to job seekers. Do you want to share a bit about what you learned and what's spinning around your head from that conversation?
Yeah, sure, Scott. So earlier this week, I was on a call with Scott and Dan, and Indiana has put together some AI capability on their UI interface. So when somebody files an unemployment claim, it ties into all the data, or maybe not all, but some data that they have on their workforce availability, training opportunities, wage information, and some reemployment services. And they're, actually guiding people to be able to make some really informed career decisions, not just to find a replacement income position, but to maybe make a step up in their career ladder, figure out if training actually has a return on investment for them, figure out if that's a good fit for them skill-wise, aptitude-wise, interest-wise. And they've collected enough data so that they're actually seeing some real tangible benefits for their constituencies. And I thought that was a really good application because it's tying all of this data together in ways that we wouldn't be able to do, with our current resources. And it's also showing some real value, not just for the integrity of their program, but value for their taxpayers, for the citizens of Indiana. So I really like that. And I thought it was a good model for us to be thinking about when we're thinking about, where do we want to apply this kind of technology? And certainly, Scott, your, take on it as well. But that's kind of the high level summary, I think, that describes what they're doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And then just to pull out one thread here is, I think they observed very much what you just said, Mark, which is their state workforce agency is sitting on this incredibly rich repository of information, which is quarterly filings from every employer about the wages of folks employed there. And then when people do file for unemployment, they get a whole lot more information from them. And that is never information that they would want to sell to a vendor. But instead, they brought in a vendor to use that to develop tools that allow job seekers to get information about, I mean, the way they described it of somebody who looks just like you and were laid off. Here's, or here are 3 people who look just like you. Here are the jobs they went to. Here are the wages that they got. And rather than it sort of being something that's kind of generated in reports and are, at the aggregate level, this is like at the individual level and using AI tools to do real-time matching of people and to pull out sort of highly specific information that they also feel really confident in, because that data is coming not from a third-party source, but from their own data. And so I think that, to me, sort of links back a little bit to here of using the data we have to both build out sort of the systems intelligence, but I think I'm also hearing you talk and others talk about how do we equip job seekers and workers with even better information about what are the kinds of work opportunities that offer the economic mobility, wages, job quality that they may be looking for.
And so, Scott, I don't know if and I apologize, got the camera back now, so sorry for jumping in here late. But as I listen to everyone talk, I just want to, just for my benefit, get clearer about what it is that we're doing here today, and is it trying to identify potential pilots? Because internally at the Department of Labor, we've been talking about all of this. So if this is hey, how can we convince some state agencies to jump in here? We're already there with wanting to engage. We've heard from our colleagues from all over the country. The last meeting we had, we heard from some colleagues in New Jersey about how they're using it. So I think that we're identifying multiple opportunities within the department for how we could do some of this. And so what we're doing today, trying to say, hey, of everything that we can possibly do, what are 3 things that we would love to do, and what are the barriers to that? Or are we just exploring what all of the possibilities are?
For me, I think it was the latter, only because we were just trying to come at this general question of how do the systems and policy need to evolve. But hearing what you just said, Commissioner, I wonder if our group might, if I don't know that you could do it today or would want to, but if there were a roadmap that you already know is the future for your group to get at these themes, maybe our group could be helpful in amplifying, what you need to get the resource and the support to see that roadmap through, whether it's funding or a mandate. Maybe among our recommendations might be, the governor should, both charge and empower the commissioner for the Department of Labor to build the most modern tech integrated, workforce systems, paradigm in the country, building on models that, look like X, Y, and Z, and in partnership with private industries such as, the groups that Warren was just mentioning. Do you already have it kind of ready to roll?
I'd say, Chris, a roadmap is a little too strong a word, but I think that we have, and we're going to be doing some more work on this next week. But each of our bureaus, so when you is already looking at how can they, if we had the resources, the skill, the authority to move forward, how could AI be used to improve opportunities for workers in the state. So, and that means we're looking at it through our Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, through our Bureau of Employment Services, our unemployment insurance program, and what Eric was talking about linking unemployment and workforce. There's a program that I think we're probably doing, not a program in the sense of like a technology program, but a rapid reemployment program that we've been piloting. How can we get our employment services and our unemployment programs to seamlessly work together? So we have the alignment of, first of all, the policy that this is what those two different bureaus are doing, but and we have people who are committed to it, but the piece that's missing to do what Eric laid out is that technology piece. You know, we can identify, hey, we've got folks who are already doing manually on the ground many of the things that were laid out, that if we had the technology to help with, that could kind of jumpstart those activities. We're also incredibly concerned, as Mark said, about the integrity of the data and making sure that we do everything that we're doing in a thoughtful way that doesn't expose people's personal data to hacking. But we've got things that we're doing around fraud detection that could be helpful. We've got decisions that we're trying to process that would be helpful. There are just numerous potential case studies that would be helpful. So that's why I'm just trying to figure out like where are we dabbling here? And then the one thing I didn't hear today, but it may have been discussed before I was able to join, was around what are we doing to train our staff so that they can appropriately use these tools, and what are those kind of guardrails and parameters that we need. So I'd say it's not just money and it's not just authority. It's also, we need to make sure that we have staff who have received the training. And on the New Jersey call, I'm trying to remember, but I think Rob Angelo, the commissioner there, said that they had a 9-module program for their employees. So I don't mean to take us down this rabbit hole, but it's just like, yeah, we've got lots of ideas and lots of things. So just help me focus a little bit here, Chris.
I want to let others react, and then I'll offer an observation as well, because I think you've just given us so much to work with. But what do others have in mind based on what the commissioner just shared?
Well, I'll just say that the kind of the way that I'm thinking about this is that we have, within the Department of Labor, we have many use cases for how this technology might, better serve our customers, better direct resources, better use staff time, like et cetera. We're adding to that list of use cases, and I think we're at a point where we are thinking through what is the avenue by which we might get to some of those endpoints. So, for example, would it be, a request for proposal, or are there certain models, like certain vendors, like the project that Eric described in Indiana? Is that something that we want to try to replicate, or is there something that's a little bit broader that would maybe encompass multiple projects, multiple bureaus, something that's more generalizable, et cetera? So how does that come together? How do we identify the right technology solution? How do we procure that? Who are the bureaus that are responsible? How do we train our staff to use it to take that next step? And then, of course, the question that's always in the background is where are the resources going to come from to pay for it?
Yeah. Representative Sarah, last time I was purposely being stubborn on that resources question and punting on it, but I'm curious to know, like, how does the legislature think about something like this? I mean, surely you're all you're all serving the community and the public's best interests, but you're also trying to help us find ways to pay for it. But how should we think about the balance between sort of big, bold ideas and the reality of what you all just lived through in the last session?
Yeah, dangerous question. How does the legislature think? We're in a resource constrained environment right now, and the constraint is increasing. So the discussion in the legislature, I think, is going to be what can we stop doing so that we can fund doing this? Where it's feeling very zero sum to me right now, and that's said as a member of the tax committee who saw things that could have raised additional revenue, not without political pain, not without financial pain to the people who would have been affected. And none of those things went through.
Right.
So I think, I don't want to discourage the bold thinking, because the bold thinking creates the case for the expenditure, but the context for the expenditure is going to be what can we take funds from, rather than where can we find new funds. At least that's how it feels to me right now.
Does an efficiency paradigm carry, like it as opposed to what are we going to stop doing? Government grows, every organization grows, but we're going to grow at a slower rate because we're going to find efficiencies through the technology. We can hold budgets, sort of slower growth. Or does that land in the legislature as sort of just like wishful thinking?
The problem is that we don't do what are called dynamic fiscal notes. So it would really be incumbent on the executive, not the legislative, to come up with that approach to planning, I think, and do it in the budget process rather than in the legislative process. Because when we create a bill and we create the cost estimate for it, fiscal note, there's no place in the process to estimate the cost savings of doing such a thing.
Yeah.
So that's why it's more properly within the executive departments than within the legislature to do that kind of efficiency forecasting.
So, and I'm going to purposely be ignorant again, so forgive me for all of you who are about to tell me why this is the wrong suggestion. But what if among our recommendations to the governor would be to empower and charge each commissioner to use technology and private partnerships to realize a 33%, efficiency or productivity gain, and a corresponding, make it up, 10% increase in customer satisfaction. And then model that, deal with what Representative Sayre just said, and do that in a way that doesn't just blow up the budget, right? The charge is find a way to be more productive and more efficient, because that's what this technology does better than anything we've ever seen before. And so everyone who's leading every agency in state government needs to have an AI first plan, needs to have an AI partner, and needs to have an AI education paradigm to help up-level their workforce. And then if that somehow makes it into our recommendations, that then opens the door to also come back to this idea of an AI for all education paradigm for all citizens, so that we're also educating the citizens concurrently, so that it's not just incumbent upon your coaches and advisors, Commissioner Fortman. The citizens themselves are learning how to use the technology and better sort of driving us. I realize that all sounds kind of, pie in the sky, but in the resource constrained, zero sum, politically, gridlocked environment that we're in, it might carry, because everybody loves efficiency and everybody agrees that nobody believes that there isn't some way to find some efficiency and cost savings. And I think if we framed it right, we might capture people's imagination that it's really possible with this technology. I mean, we've all used it. We've all personally become, 20% more efficient when we use it. So something, and what I was thinking when you were saying earlier, Commissioner, that might then give you, kind of the cover to go to the legislature or whoever, however you get the money or however you work the partnership part is probably the part where this doesn't work, because inviting private companies into the government's business will probably take forever and a day and all that. But something around also integrating all these data in the way that you described with the two agencies already ready to go on all these things, doing the integration. I think it needs to be some really audacious mandate coming from the executive along those lines. And each agency can then respond to it as they will. And some will be, early adopters and innovators, and others will be laggards. But those early adopters and innovators will probably find some really innovative solutions as well. I'm just trying to tie this all together somehow and deal, like I wasn't doing last time, with the financial reality of where we are.
I also think there is just a thread in my mind, going back to the idea of getting better about sort of the information that we have and employer sentiment of labor market trends. I mean, Mark's group does a tremendous job about that. I think doubling down in that area, like that is a place in my mind where there's the costs are fairly limited in terms of getting better information, more real-time information, and enables a huge amount of sort of these other kind of responsiveness of the system as this continues to evolve. And I think one of the things I observed sort of listening to the conversations of this group that I think makes particularly this subgroup's charge really challenging is there's just an enormous range of uncertainty about what the future holds for sort of the labor market impacts of AI. And the smartest folks in the country thinking about this, the people who have won Nobel Prizes in economics, or as Mark has predicted, should be winning, there's still a whole lot range of predictions around what the future may hold, and could be really dark, or also could be enormous opportunities. Could end up having both for different folks. So I think that's one of the challenging things is, and in my mind, one of the things that remains quite powerful about continuing to really stay on top of the trends in real time as much as we can. And so as this evolution happens in ways we don't know, that enables people sitting in Commissioner Fortman's chair and Commissioner Duguay's chair and your chair, Chris, at the root, to be able to adapt as quickly as we can.
Mark, remind us, what is it, hyperbole, or do the data show that the jobs really do go away? Your data suggested that even in the sort of most dire circumstances, we actually still grow. You just grow differently.
Yeah, I think that kind of the way that I think about generative AI is a continuation of technological development that's played out over many decades. It might accelerate. It could, start to look wildly different. But in my mind, what has happened over time has been a shifting of, somewhat more demand for workers in some areas and somewhat less demand for workers in other areas. And so I think a key question will be kind of the relative magnitude of those things happening and how quickly it all happens. But to me, at this point, we aren't seeing, at least in Maine, we are not seeing, extremely large layoff events, employers that have hundreds or thousands of workers that, suddenly are kind of flipping a switch overnight and saying, AI is taking over these responsibilities and we're laying off these sets of workers. It's not to say that will never happen, but I think that's not what we're seeing today. I think what we will see is, again, a shifting of of labor demand, with more demand for certain types of workforce, certain types of skills, and less demand for others. And I think a lesson of the past waves of automation has been, if you think about, one of the most significant waves of automation to affect the United States has been the integration of automation technology into production. You can think about like factory floors, the way that those have transformed with machines and robots being integrated in the assembly process. And I think a key lesson from that has been that workers that worked alongside or had a skill set that was complementary to the technology were much better off in the long term. And those that had a skill set that was substitutable or replaced by the technology were worse off and most likely to be displaced from a job, right? So on a factory floor, if there is an automation technology that comes in, if you had a job, assembling parts, and your work is substituted by a robot or a machine that's able to do that, you're much likely to be worse off compared to somebody that has the skill set to work alongside and troubleshoot or program or augment that machine with an advanced skill set. So I believe that it's probably a helpful lesson for thinking about what will play out. I think workers that are have a skill set to work alongside in complementary ways to become more effective using this technology are more likely to be better off versus those. And the one that I kind of highlighted within my report out a few months back was, for example, office and administrative functions, where the AI is able to largely complete many tasks around data entry or organizing information, organizing scheduling, things like that, is probably an area of where we'll see lower demand for workforce, which has already been playing out over many decades.
I wanted to chime, if I may, wanted to chime in on what Mark was just saying. I think Maine's well positioned to be much more on the opportunity than the risk side because of the structure of our workforce. The guy who's cutting my bookshelves right now is not going to lose his job to AI, nor will an electrician or a lobsterman or a logger. Those kinds of white collar knowledge workers. Once upon a time, I had the title of associate marketing manager, and that's probably an AI challenged job. If we can implement those tools, kind of just taking a quick peek at the Indiana tool, to more rapidly connect a worker who's been displaced to the skills acquisition, the work that they would need to do to get skills to fit into something new. I think Maine's going to lose a lot less, and with the right strategy, some of the things that Chris and Mark have been talking about in particular could get us to a place where there's more high wage employment for the people that we do have.
I also think our demographics, which we always talk about as one of our biggest threats and challenges, the aging population, et cetera. In this case, it buys us a little bit of room for the reality that jobs still need to be done. And so long as people are willing to be retrained and continually learning, our small population, particularly early career, if all of us are willing and able to constantly be retooling and relearning, we're maybe also a little bit less vulnerable than, say, a much larger market where a competition for the opportunities that are here would be greater among a much larger population. That doesn't deal with the fact that companies may look at that same reality and say, well, there's just not enough talent there to come in the first place. So it doesn't help us in that regard, but it might allow us to worry a little less about unemployed masses because of AI. Any other thoughts on this? And if not, maybe we tackle briefly the two cross-cutting charges from our co-chairs.
Can I just jump in here for a second too? We were talking about two different things. as well in terms of recommendations. One was for the population as a whole, like workers as a whole. What do we need to do and how do we need to prepare them? And then the other piece of it was on that service delivery model of how are we delivering that training and reaching out to those people. So that was for state government and other groups that are helping people identify their career paths or how to deal with it when they are unemployed. Those are kind of two different buckets, Chris, and may need two slightly different approaches, or at least recognizing that it's not the same thing across both.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. Let's talk about innovation. Actually, I think we've talked about both of these topics a little bit. Let me paste the two questions in the chat. I don't know that we need to talk about it just because. Here's one, and the other is this one. I don't know that we've maybe talked about risks enough. The other one, so the first being innovation. And again, these are questions that the co-chairs added to the original framing questions that they've asked each group to sort of have a point of view on. In this area, how can Maine mobilize AI innovation where it's needed most? And I actually think we've talked a lot about that in all three of our meetings, demonstration sites, partnerships, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe in the time we have left, we'll tackle this next one. In this area, risks. In this area, what are the most relevant potential harms from AI? How can Maine monitor impacts and risks in the future? We definitely have talked about the monitoring and the sentiment and the engaging, but should we talk a little bit about just naming the very clear and obvious risks, so that when we write up our findings in some way, we've got something to say specifically to this prompt. Warren, I think you're muted if you're offering comments.
Sorry, Chris. Isn't workforce dislocation and unemployment one of the biggest ones?
I think so. I mean, we end up with people who can't pay the mortgage or the rent. And then just building on that, as I said a minute ago, if we're not perceived as a place of talent and resourcefulness, then new economic investment won't come. And worst case scenario, companies that are here may leave. And we've certainly experienced that, and growth is an imperative. So those are also some pretty substantial risks. I think there's also just it's more of a squishy one, but there's this broadening of this us and them paradigm, the haves and the have-nots. You could frame it in economic terms too, but I do think increasingly there are people in the country who just worry that they're already left behind, and this is going to accelerate it. And a deepening divide within our communities. Excuse me, around
for sure the increase in inequality is a big one. So Chris, just for fun, I asked AI to answer this question. And the list it gave was job displacement, skills obsolescence, wage pressure, and job polarization, which they basically mean in inequality, what you just said, gigification and dehumanization of work, loss of human judgment and accountability, bias and discrimination, reduced bargaining power, and uneven impact across sectors and regions. Digital divide. So those are 8. You could probably categorize it differently and end up with 5 or 12, but those seem like pretty good categories to me.
Sure. Is there anything through the state government lens that our colleagues might want to offer, reminding us and me again about the unique role and responsibility of state government from a risk perspective?
One that I would throw out is fraud, imposter fraud, cyber attacks. So I think we can use this as a technology to help bolster our defenses. But on the other hand, I think this technology will lead to greater sophistication of cyber attack, imposter fraud, et cetera, which will impact, obviously, wherever it's targeted, the ability of government to deliver services to constituents.
Yeah, and I think it's included in the elements that Warren identified, but it's also something about the built-in, well, being careful about the bias that's in the AI and maintaining human involvement in decision making, particularly on issues that impact like economic security programs like unemployment insurance. We have not supported like a straight up AI appeals process. Some of that information could be generated using AI, but we want skilled appeals hearing officers to like review documents and things like that. So we would just want it built in. So when you were talking, Chris, about efficiency and using that, that balance between efficiency and making sure that you've got a thoughtful decision making as part of it, I think is critical in public service.
Yeah, in the human centered approach, I forget which community it was. It might have been New Jersey. They, as exciting as the technology was, they still had a QA, being done by the humans before they rendered it back to action. Okay.
I might share two others that have been on my mind from some recent reading. One a little bit more sort of internal focused for government, but as AI agents, as autonomous deployments of AI tool become more accessible to the public, I imagine that our public benefit systems may start getting more and more overwhelmed with applications, in the same way that anybody who's tried to hire a job in the past 2 years has seen that job applications have grown by 10x, but a lot of that is kind of crud from AI bots. I think I've seen some examples of AI agents that have been deployed to make a dinner reservation and calling restaurants around the city, trying to figure out who's availability, and talk to somebody extend that idea from another state of are our call centers across all of our different public benefits centers, are we ready when AI agents are starting to call every day to check on the status of benefit applications or to follow up on complaints, and just simply like operationally there's a huge influx of volume that may be really hard to navigate it. So but in the scheme of things, that feels a little bit kind of internal facing. I think the other thing that I've been thinking a little bit about in the workforce is what the loop around the addictive nature of social media, how AI is enabling sort of hyper personalized social media, and how those things are playing out. And I think I know Laura, you hear this all the time from employers. I think one of the things that the opioid epidemic in Maine, it really challenged employers, and an epidemic of addiction around drugs really challenged employers in terms of people who could regularly show up and do the job and go to work. And I think there is a world that, I have no idea what the odds of this are, but the addictive powers of social media that are accelerated through new AI tech creates risks around addiction to social media in a way that looks quite parallel to what our workforce experienced around addictions to substances. And then all of the shakeout implications of motivation, aspiration, ability to sort of show up at work every day. That's your happy thought for me for the day.
I was just thinking how sobering. Thanks. And gosh. Okay. Warren, I clicked on, thanks for putting those in the chat. I clicked on one and it wouldn't load for me. I wonder, do I need to be logged in, do you think? Or,
I think you probably have to be logged into ChatGPT.
okay, I'll do it offline. And Lauren, can you make sure to grab those URLs that Warren offered in the chat for our notes? I think if we could spend a few minutes on how we now want to land this plane, I think this has been great, everyone, and mission accomplished. We've had really substantive discussion on each of our 5, guiding questions. Great participation. What we owe our co-chairs and our colleagues is some sort of synthesis and recommendation, that reflects what we discovered. I was trying to think about the best way to do that, and I'm open to ideas, but I wonder if oh, sorry, it was to me. The chat thing, I'll grab them. So Lauren, I'm seeing your chat. I'll get them to you. I'm open to other ideas, but one thing I wondered is if each of us could just take and
Sorry,
Lauren
did I put the links just to you, Chris?
I think so, yeah, and I didn't want to derail myself further, but yeah, if you could resend them to the all, that might be helpful. It came to just me.
I think they should be on all now.
Warren's taken the chat GPT stuff he was just sharing with us and added a Maine context and put them in the chat for all. Lauren and I could prompt this. If each of us could set aside some time in the next, ideally, few days to just craft your own one-page memo on kind of your thoughts on this discussion that we've had over several meetings and/or the 5 specific prompts. What Lauren and I could do is stitch all that together into a document, edit it for tone and consistency, reflect on the notes that we've taken over the last few meetings to make sure we haven't forgotten anything that was really substantive, and render it back as a rough draft. And then I thought we might all be able to also kind of work offline, with a shared document, edit, comment, offer suggestions.
Chris, one suggestion,
Yep.
just even maybe before you do that,
Yep.
if it's possible to take the transcripts of these meetings and put them into ChatGPT and then ask ChatGPT to create like a 3-page summary, just so that we have, a really distilled version of the notes.
That's a great point.
And then we can each take that, because the one thing ChatGPT is very good at summarizing, not so good at prioritizing. Yeah. So we can sort of go through there and try to figure out what we think is most important to help to create that sort of, our own individual one-pagers, and then give it to you for collation. That's
a great suggestion. Dan, do we have text transcripts from each of these sessions because they've been recorded?
Yeah, everything. There was one that I missed that I'll have to triple check on, but I think all the ones that I've been on have been recorded and I can pull transcripts from. Yeah.
And then Lauren and I could do, as Warren's suggesting, kind of work the chat GTP summaries, distribute them out to all of you, and then you can build your own one-pager. That's a great suggestion, Warren. Thanks. So Dan, if you wouldn't mind getting those over to me, Lauren and I'll work on the AI-driven summary. And then we'll communicate out to all of you what we've produced with a reminder of kind of the deliverable. And then we'll put a deadline on it. If you can get to it, it would be great. If you can't get to it, then, you can add as we try to land the plane on the draft that we circulate. And then I'd appreciate, especially Dan and Scott, you both looking at it with respect to kind of like, ultimately, if we're really good at this, it could be kind of copy paste into some sort of finished document. So it might be nice if you could weigh in specifically about how best to position some of these ideas for the audience, All right. We have it. Thanks everyone for your time. The co-chairs opened with this yesterday, and I'll echo it on their behalf. I mean, all of us, have signed up to do this for whatever reason and to be helpful. And it's already taken a lot of people's time, and this subgroup has done as well. We'll try to really efficiently get our work back in Scott and Dan's hands and rejoin the broader group. But thanks so much for your participation. It's been really fun and helpful.
And thanks for your leadership, Chris.
Oh, thanks. Bye,
See ya.
everyone. Have a great day.
Fine. Thanks, everyone.